In the early 14th century, Italy was like a messy quilt of competitive city-states, all scrapping for power and bragging rights. Take Bologna and Modena for instance. They were neighbors, which added some extra spice to their rivalry. Then in 1325, something wild happened. In the dead of night, a bunch of Modenese commandos pulled off a covert operation. Their target? The most precious treasure in Bologna, or so they thought. Drum roll please. It was a glorious golden crown. No, just kidding. It was a plain old wooden bucket. Now why in the name of Caesar salad would anyone want to steal a humble wooden bucket, you ask? Well, my friends, it wasn't about the bucket itself. It was about one-upping their rivals and flexing their muscles in the neighborhood. This act, as bizarre as it may seem, was like a medieval mic drop in the context of their long-standing feud. You can bet the Bolognese weren't thrilled about it. No way were they letting someone stroll in and walk off with their cherished possession. They were ready to bring out Nonna's rolling pin. A citywide alert went out, and soon Bolognese and Modenese soldiers were duking it out over this simple piece of medieval Tupperware, as if it were the holy grail of the Italian kitchen. In the end, Modena came out on top, parading the bucket like the Iron Throne of Bolognese dominance. The War of the Bucket is a prime example of how absurd human conflicts can get. But hey, some folks say that the Modena took the bucket as a trophy after the war, and in reality the war itself happened because Modena captured the Bolognese castle of Monteveglio. So you can pick the one that you think is most likely. Next up is the world's slowest burn, the 335 Years' War. So let's set the stage. We're in the year 1651, when Whigs were all the rage and the English Civil War was at full swing, and you've got this diplomatic tiff brewing between the Dutch Republic and the Isles of Scilly. Now, this whole thing kicked off because a Dutch fleet decided to hang out with the wrong crowd, the Royalists. Fast forward to the end of the war, treaties flying around like confetti at a parade, but oopsie-doodle, they forgot to put an end to this teeny tiny disagreement. But here's the kicker, this wasn't your usual war with epic battles and fiery explosions. No, this was a war of paperwork gone wrong. No battles, no bloodshed, just a bunch of old scrolls that were sitting around, ignored like last week's leftovers hiding in the back of the fridge. For centuries, this so-called war just persisted on paper, gathering cobwebs and dust bunnies until 1986 when a historian wearing cool parachute pants and even cooler shoulder pads stumbled upon this forgotten feud. Now you can bet the Dutch and the Isles of Scilly must have had a good chuckle about the whole thing. 335 years, huh? Maybe it's time we sit down and have a nice cup of tea, chaps. And just like that, the world's slowest war came to an end with a quaint little peace treaty. So we're zipping back to 1859 on San Juan Island, where two heavyweight nations, the USA and the UK, were on the edge of duking it out over a pig. Yeah, you heard me right, a pig. Not a precious diamond, not a majestic crown, but a good old curly-tailed oink-producing pig. Now, this wasn't your everyday pig. No, this portly porker happened to be on the payroll of the Hudson Bay Company, a Canadian business. And one fine day, this chunky diplomat of a pig decided to take a detour into an American farmer's potato patch. Guess what happened next? It went on a potato feast like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. The American farmer, not too keen on a pig raiding his spuds, did what any reasonable American would do. He shot the swine. But you see, that didn't sit well with the British authorities. They were like, "Tally-ho, chaps, we have to arrest that trigger-happy farmer." Words were flung, tensions escalated, and before you can even say bacon, both nations had troops stationed on the island, all set for a piggy showdown. Surprisingly, no shots were fired, but the standoff dragged on for weeks. Cannons were pointed, brows were furrowed, and there must have been plenty of awkward glances going around. The only casualties were some potatoes that never made it to the dinner table, and a pig. Rest in peace, little buddy. During this whole piggy standoff, both sides suddenly realized they'd overlooked a teeny detail. Who actually owned the island in the first place? Thankfully, sanity prevailed and they decided to peacefully share the island. So the pig war didn't go out with a bang, but rather with a snort, and a collective realization that fighting over a porker wasn't the best idea they'd ever had. Now, let's head over to Mexico, 1838. We've got French bakers and pastry chefs doing their thing in Mexico, but they've got their fair share of problems. You see, Mexican officials were stewing over some hefty debts they owed these French folks. Now, picture this one pastry chef who was probably one cream puff away from losing his cool. His shop got ransacked, and he wasn't having any of it. So, he sends a passionate plea to the French government demanding justice and a hefty compensation. France, never one to let its citizens crumble in despair, goes full throttle. They're like, Mexico, you're gonna pay for the damages to this pastry chef soup. And don't even get us started about these outstanding debts. Mexico, being a bit short on dough, just couldn't see eye to eye with France. So France decides that diplomatic negotiations weren't as sweet as they'd hoped, and they kick off what's now called the Pastry War. The whole shebang involves French forces sailing over to Mexico and giving the city of Veracruz a real shelling. It wasn't a full-blown war, mind you. France mainly wanted to flex its military muscles and make Mexico cough up the cash. The Pastry War doesn't drag on forever. It's actually relatively short-lived, and eventually both sides come to an agreement. Mexico pays up, and just like that, the Pastry War wraps up. Who would have thought that pastries could stir up such a fuss? Lastly, the War of Jenkins Ear. It's the year 1731 and Robert Jenkins, a British sailor, is out there on his ship doing his thing, probably singing some sea shanties and pondering life's mysteries. But well, here comes his Spanish ship, crashing his little solo party. The Spanish sailors board his ship, and in a real cutthroat move, they chop off Jenkins' ear and sail off into the sunset, leaving Jenkins with a brand new nickname and an ear-shaped hole in his heart. Now, fast forward to 1738, and Jenkins, who's now the life of the party with one less ear but a killer story, decides to stroll into the British Parliament with his severed ear as Exhibit A. This gruesome incident, combined with Britain's growing worry about Spanish mischief in the Americas, is like tossing dynamite onto a fire pit. The Brits are fuming and they want revenge for their seafaring Van Gogh. So in 1739, the War of Jenkins' Ear kicks off. There are some serious naval battles involved. British naval forces duke it out with their Spanish counterparts in the Caribbean and off the coast of Florida. Now, despite the name, this war isn't just a one-sided deal. The Spanish forces also score their victories in certain encounters. It's no walk in the park for either side. But as things escalate, this war gets tangled up in a much bigger European conflict called the War of the Austrian Succession. It's a whole web of alliances and conflicts with major European powers duking it out. However, despite the dramatic beginning and all this broader European fuss, the War of Jenkins' Ear didn't really lead to any massive changes or clear outcomes. It all kind of fizzles out when the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 ends the European War of the Austrian Succession and, by extension, the War of Jenkins' Ear. The treaty doesn't even bother to address the very incident that kicked this whole thing off. You know, the loss of Robert Jenkins' ear. So it leaves you with this lingering feeling of unresolved justice, a historical loose end in what's otherwise a pretty curious and eventful chapter in history. This just goes to show that sometimes things just sort of end.